My name is Mario. I'm 32 years old and work as a construction project manager in Seattle. I've always been the reliable son, the one my family calls when they need help. My brother Connor became a successful investment banker in New York while I stayed close to home. Last month, I was about to knock on my parents' bedroom door when I overheard words that shattered my world. They were planning to use me, their dependable son, as their personal ATM. I quietly walked away that day, my trust broken forever. Before I start my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this sounds familiar, hit that like button and subscribe to know what happened next in this family betrayal. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Seattle. Our house was modest but comfortable, a two-story craftsman that my dad, Frank, was constantly fixing up on weekends. Dad worked as an electrician for a local company, putting in long hours and often taking side jobs to keep our finances afloat. Mom, Judith, worked as a school administrator, managing budgets and schedules with the same precision she applied to our household. Money was always tight growing up. I remember the hushed conversations between my parents at the kitchen table after they thought Connor and I had gone to bed. They'd spread bills across the wooden surface, calculating and recalculating, trying to stretch dollars that never seemed to go far enough. Despite these struggles, one message was constantly drilled into us. Family comes first. We help each other. We sacrifice for each other. We never leave family hanging. My brother Connor was always the star of the family. 3 years younger than me, he showed academic brilliance from an early age. While I struggled to maintain B's, Connor effortlessly brought home straight A's, won science competitions, and was president of every club he joined. His academic performance earned him a full scholarship to an Ivy League university on the East Coast. My parents beamed with pride at his graduation, Dad repeatedly telling anyone who would listen, "That's my boy, headed for great things." Meanwhile, I worked my way through the state university, choosing construction management because it was practical and built on the hands-on skills Dad had taught me. I wasn't jealous of Connor's success exactly, but I noticed the difference in how our achievements were celebrated. My college graduation dinner was at the local Italian restaurant. Connor's was a weekend affair, with extended family flying in from across the country. After college, I stayed in Seattle, eventually landing a solid position with a reputable construction firm. I worked hard, saved what I could, and became the family's reliable support system. When Mom needed emergency gallbladder surgery and their insurance didn't cover all the costs, I wrote a check for $12,000 without hesitation. When Dad wanted to try starting a small electrical contracting business, I contributed $7,500 to help him get started. Equipment purchases, license fees, initial advertising, all supported by my savings. The business ultimately failed after 18 months, but my contribution was never mentioned again. It was simply what was expected of me as the dependable son who had extra money because I didn't have the prestigious lifestyle expenses that Connor had acquired. Beyond these major expenses, there were countless smaller drains on my finances. I was the one who showed up to fix the leaking roof, bringing not just my labor, but purchasing all the materials. I was the one who replaced their aging water heater when it finally gave out during a particularly cold January. I was the one who loaned money when bills piled up. Money that somehow transformed from loans to gifts in my parents' memories. All this time, Connor was building his career in investment banking in New York. His social media showcased a lifestyle of expensive restaurants, luxury apartments, and exotic vacations. He'd fly home for Christmas with designer luggage and gifts purchased from high-end stores, spending the holiday regaling everyone with stories of celebrity sightings and exclusive clubs. My parents soaked up every word, their faces shining with pride. Connor's handling the portfolio for that tech CEO everyone's talking about. Dad would announce to relatives, neighbors, even the cashier at the local hardware store. My promotions and projects never received the same enthusiasm. Mario's still with that construction company was the most my accomplishments usually warranted. The implicit message was clear. Connor was exceptional. I was simply meeting basic expectations. I didn't let it bother me too much. I enjoyed my work, took pride in seeing my projects transform from blueprints to actual buildings, and appreciated my team. But recently, the construction industry in Seattle had been facing challenges. Several major projects had been put on hold due to financing issues, and rumors of layoffs had everyone on edge. I wasn't in immediate danger of losing my job, but the uncertainty had me reviewing my finances and considering my options more carefully than usual. Despite the industry uncertainty, I lived modestly and had managed to save a decent amount over the years. My apartment wasn't fancy, but it was in a good neighborhood with a reasonable commute. My 5-year-old Honda was paid off and well-maintained. I took one good vacation each year, usually a road trip or camping adventure rather than Connor's international excursions. My girlfriend Rachel and I had been together for 3 years, and I'd recently purchased an engagement ring that I was planning to give her during our upcoming trip to the Oregon coast. It had cost more than I'd initially budgeted, but Rachel deserved something special, and I'd been careful with my finances everywhere else. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle shifts in my family's behavior. Mom had started asking more questions about my job security and savings. Dad had begun reminiscing about all the ways they'd supported me growing up, stories that somehow always ended with comments like, "That's what family does for each other." Connor had been calling more frequently than usual. Our conversations strangely focused on my career and financial situation rather than his usual self-centered updates. But I didn't connect these dots until that fateful Sunday evening, when I arrived at my parents' house for our regular family dinner, completely unaware that everything was about to change. It was the first Sunday in October, a crisp autumn evening with leaves starting to turn gold and crimson across the neighborhood. I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 5:30, the same time I arrived every week for our standing family dinner. The routine was comforting, a constant in my sometimes chaotic work life where project deadlines and contractor issues created unpredictable days. Mom's silver Camry was parked in its usual spot, and next to it was a sleek black BMW I recognized as Connor's rental. I was surprised to see it since Connor rarely made it to our Sunday dinners, usually citing work commitments or last-minute social engagements in New York. His unexpected presence explained the extra cars lining the street, which I had initially attributed to the neighbors hosting another gathering. The familiar scent of Mom's pot roast greeted me when I entered the house, along with the sound of a football game playing on the living room television. Dad called out a distracted greeting without taking his eyes off the screen. The Seattle Seahawks were playing, and judging by his tense posture, they weren't doing well. "Your mom's upstairs," he said, wincing as the opposing team scored. "Dinner in about 20 minutes. I nodded and headed toward the stairs, wondering where Connor was since he wasn't watching the game with Dad, their usual bonding activity during his rare visits home. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard voices coming from my parents' bedroom. The door was partially open, allowing their conversation to drift into the hallway. I was about to announce my presence when Connor's agitated voice caught my attention. "It's just a temporary setback," he was saying, his tone carrying that familiar defensive edge I recognized from childhood whenever he was in trouble. "The investment looked solid. Everyone at the firm was putting money into it. But $230,000, Connor?" My father's voice was low but intense. "That's not pocket change. Where are you going to get that kind of money when you're already leveraged with the apartment and the car?" My feet froze in the hallway. Connor was in financial trouble? This didn't align with the image he projected or the success stories he regularly shared. "I've got some options," Connor replied, but he didn't sound convinced. "I might be able to get an advance against my bonus, but that won't cover all of it." "What about your savings?" my mother asked. Connor's laugh was bitter. "What savings? The Manhattan lifestyle doesn't exactly encourage saving, Mom." There was a pause, and I should have walked away then. Instead, I remained rooted in place, somehow knowing that what came next would be important. "What about Mario?" My mother's voice was thoughtful. "He's always been good with money. He must have quite a bit saved up by now. He lives so simply." The last word carried a hint of something between pity and condescension that made my chest tighten. "Mario?" Connor sounded surprised, then considering. "I guess he might. He's never really struggled, has he? Not like this." "He's always been the reliable one," my father agreed, his tone warming, "always there when the family needs him. He'll never say no to family," my mother added with certainty that chilled me, especially if we frame it right. I could almost hear Connor's brain working through the implications. "You really think he'd loan me that kind of money?" "We wouldn't ask for it all at once," my father said, his voice taking on the practical tone he used when planning a home repair project. "We could tell him it's for fixing the foundation of the house. It needs work anyway, and he knows about construction costs. He'd never even know it was for you," my mother added. "We'll say it's for house repairs. He'll never know the difference. Don't worry about the debt. We'll make your brother pay. He'll never say no to family." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My pulse pounded in my ears so loudly, I was certain they must hear it from the bedroom. My hands began to tremble, and I pressed them against my thighs to steady them. Connor's relieved laugh felt like a knife between my ribs that would buy me time to figure things out. Mario's always been a sucker for helping out, hasn't he? He gets that from my side, my mother said proudly, as if my willingness to be exploited was a virtuous trait she had carefully cultivated. I stood there, trying to process what I'd heard. My first impulse was to burst into the room, to confront them with their betrayal, to demand an explanation for how they could so casually plot to deceive me. But some instinct for self-preservation held me back. If I confronted them now, in the heat of shock and anger, they would have excuses ready, manipulative explanations that would make me doubt what I'd heard. Instead, I quietly retreated down the hallway and descended the stairs. My hands were still shaking when I pulled out my phone and quickly typed out a text message to my father. Emergency at job site. Need to head there now. Rain check on dinner. I was backing my car out of the driveway when I saw my father appear at the front door, phone in hand, looking confused. I gave a quick wave that I hoped conveyed apology rather than the turmoil raging inside me, and drove away before he could respond. The 15-minute drive back to my apartment passed in a blur. I parked haphazardly, not caring that I was slightly over the line into the next space, and sat with the engine off, trying to bring order to my chaotic thoughts. They had been planning to use me. Not just Connor, which might have been painful but not entirely surprising given his self-centered nature, but my parents too. The people who were supposed to protect me, to have my best interests at heart, had been calculating how to exploit my sense of family loyalty. I sat in my car until long after dark, replaying the conversation in my mind, searching for alternative interpretations, for some explanation that would make their words less devastating. But there was no ambiguity in what I had heard. They saw me as a resource to be tapped, not a son to be cherished. When I finally went inside, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat at my kitchen table in the darkness and opened my laptop. With methodical precision, I transferred my savings into a new account at a different bank, one my parents had no knowledge of. I removed them as emergency contacts on my existing accounts. I changed passwords and security questions. I erased the digital pathways they might use to access my financial information. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing years of financial support I had provided, seeing each instance in a new and painful light. What I had viewed as acts of love and family commitment, they had apparently seen as obligations they were entitled to extract from me. The realization left me feeling hollow, as if something fundamental inside me had been scooped out, leaving an empty space where security and trust had once resided. As dawn broke, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never allow myself to be used that way again, not even by the people who were supposed to love me most. The week that followed was a blur of emotional turbulence masked by the routine of work. I threw myself into project planning meetings and site inspections with an intensity that had my team exchanging concerned glances. The physical activity of climbing through partially constructed buildings and the mental focus required to solve logistical problems provided temporary escape from the betrayal echoing in my thoughts. At night, alone in my apartment, I began the painful process of examining my financial relationship with my family. I created a spreadsheet, methodically documenting every loan, gift, and expense I had covered over the years. The growing total at the bottom of the screen made me feel physically ill. Beyond the major expenses I'd always remembered, there were countless smaller drains I'd normalized. The $600 for Connor's textbooks, his sophomore year, when his scholarship didn't cover them. The $2,000 for my parents' anniversary vacation 3 years ago. The temporary help with their property taxes that had somehow become an annual contribution. Each individual amount had seemed reasonable in the moment, a natural extension of family support. Compiled together, they told a different story. My phone buzzed regularly with messages from my parents, asking why I'd missed Sunday dinner, suggesting alternate times to get together, expressing concern about the emergency at work. I responded with vague reassurances and excuses about being swamped with a new project, buying time while I processed my emotions. Connor returned to New York without attempting to contact me, which only confirmed my suspicions. He had been part of the plan, but wasn't invested enough in our relationship to check on me independently of our parents' prompting. One evening after work, I met my best friend Alex at our favorite coffee shop near the waterfront. The familiar setting, with its worn leather couches and the constant background hum of espresso machines, provided a small measure of comfort. "You look like hell," Alex said bluntly, sliding a black coffee across the table to me. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then shared the whole story. Alex listened without interruption, his expression darkening as I recounted the overheard conversation. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," he said when I finished, "but this fits a pattern I've been watching for years." "What do you mean?" I asked, surprised by his lack of shock. "Mario, every time we get together, you have some new story about helping your family financially. It's always framed as temporary, but it never stops. And I've never once heard you mention them helping you." His words hit me with unexpected force. Had it really been that obvious to an outside observer? Had I been the only one blind to the pattern? "I always thought that's just what family does," I said weakly. "Help each other out." "Help goes both ways," Alex pointed out. "When was the last time they supported you through a rough patch?" I couldn't answer. "There's something else you should know," Alex added, looking uncomfortable. "I wasn't going to tell you because it seemed like gossip, but given what you just told me, my cousin works at that casino resort outside the city. He mentioned seeing Connor there a lot recently, dropping serious money at the high-stakes tables." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Connor's investment mistake was likely a gambling problem, not a legitimate financial setback. My parents had been planning to use me to bail out their golden child from his self-created problems, all while keeping me in the dark about the true nature of his temporary setback. In the days that followed, I started therapy, something I'd never considered before. The therapist, Dr. Winters, helped me recognize patterns I'd been blind to for years. I had built my identity around being the dependable one, the fixer, the provider. This role had given me a sense of purpose and value within my family, but at a devastating cost to my financial security and emotional well-being. Through our sessions, I began to see how my childhood experiences had shaped my responses. As the older brother, I had been expected to be responsible, while Connor was permitted to focus exclusively on achievement. My parents had praised me not for success, but for reliability, subtly conditioning me to derive my worth from what I could provide rather than who I was. Dr. Winters suggested I look through old family photos and journals to identify early instances of this pattern. Among memorabilia stored in my closet, I found my high school graduation card from my parents. While the printed message was generic congratulations, their handwritten note read, "We're counting on you to be the solid foundation of this family. Your dependable nature will take you far." What I had once read as a compliment now struck me as a role assignment, a job description I had unconsciously accepted and spent years fulfilling. My therapy sessions also helped me understand that my generosity hadn't actually helped my family in the long run. By repeatedly bailing them out, I had enabled behaviors that prevented growth and responsibility. Connor had never learned to live within his means because there had always been a safety net. My parents had never adjusted their financial habits because I had been there to cover the gaps. The most painful realization was that my family's love appeared conditional. They valued me for what I provided, not who I was. In the conversation I had overheard, they had referred to me not as their son who might be willing to help, but as a resource to be manipulated, a solution to their problem. The person I was, with dreams and needs of my own, had been entirely absent from their calculation. This awareness was both devastating and liberating. The certainties I had built my life around were crumbling, but in their place, I could begin to construct a new foundation based on healthier boundaries and genuine reciprocal relationships. After 3 weeks of limited contact with my family, maintained through brief text messages and vague excuses, I finally agreed to attend Sunday dinner. The decision wasn't made lightly. Part of me wanted to continue avoiding them indefinitely, but Dr. Winters had helped me recognize that confrontation, handled properly, could be an important step in establishing new boundaries. "You don't have to make any decisions about the future of your relationship with your family right now," she had advised during our session. "Just observe their behavior with your new awareness. See if they follow the patterns you've identified." The familiar drive to my parents' suburban home felt different that evening. The streets and houses that had always represented comfort and belonging now seemed charged with tension. I arrived precisely at 5:30, taking a moment in the car to steady my breathing before walking to the front door. Mom answered before I could use my key, enveloping me in a hug that lasted too long, as if trying to physically pull me back into the family system I had begun to step away from. "We've missed you so much," she said, leading me into the dining room where the table was already set with the good china reserved for special occasions. "I made all your favorites." Sure enough, the kitchen counter displayed an array of dishes that constituted a greatest hits collection of my preferred meals growing up. Lasagna with extra cheese, garlic bread, Caesar salad, with homemade dressing, and I could smell apple pie baking in the oven. The effort was transparent in its manipulation, but effective nonetheless. A wave of nostalgia threatened to weaken my resolve before I reminded myself of the conversation I had overheard in this very house. Dad emerged from the living room, clapping me on the shoulder with forced casualness. The prodigal son returns. Been busy saving the world one building at a time. His jovial tone couldn't mask the underlying tension in the room. Connor sat at the dining table, already nursing a glass of what appeared to be expensive whiskey, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "The mysterious disappearing brother," he said, raising his glass in mock toast. "Glad you could fit us into your schedule." Dinner proceeded with an awkward attempt at normalcy. Mom kept the conversation flowing, with questions about my work and anecdotes about neighbors. Dad discussed the Seahawks' recent games. Connor remained relatively quiet, contributing occasional comments about restaurants he had tried in New York or colleagues' vacation homes he had visited. I noticed his wristwatch during one elaborate hand gesture, a new luxury model that certainly didn't suggest financial distress. The disconnect between their claimed money problems and Connor's continued displays of wealth strengthened my resolve to stand firm. As Mom served the apple pie, Dad cleared his throat, adopting the serious expression I recognized from childhood discussions about money. "So, Mario, your mother and I have been dealing with some issues with the house," he began, his voice carefully casual. "Had a structural engineer look at the foundation. Turns out, we need some major work done." Mom picked up the thread seamlessly. The estimate came in around $200,000. At our age, taking out a loan that size would be difficult, and we'd hate to touch our retirement savings. "That's a lot," I said neutrally, watching their faces. "What exactly did the engineer say was wrong?" Dad launched into a detailed but vague explanation involving settling, water damage, and potential collapse, clearly counting on my construction background to lend credibility to his claims, while hoping I wouldn't ask for specifics that would expose the lie. "We were hoping you might be able to help us out," Mom interjected, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You've always been so good with your money, and this is your childhood home. I know how much it means to you." The perfect storm of guilt triggers was almost admirable in its calculation. My professional knowledge, my childhood attachment to the house, my established role as the family fixer, and the implication that refusing would endanger my elderly parents. "I'd like to see the engineer's report," I said calmly, withdrawing my hand from under hers, "and get a second opinion from some contractors I work with." A flash of alarm crossed between my parents before Dad recovered. Of course, though we'd need to move pretty quickly on this. The engineer was concerned about winter weather making things worse. Connor, who had been watching this exchange with poorly concealed interest, decided to add his weight to the effort. "Come on, Mario. It's Mom and Dad. If you can help, you should. That's what family does." The familiar phrase, spoken by the brother who had contributed nothing while benefiting from my sacrifices for years, was the catalyst that finally broke my restraint. "Is that what family does, Connor?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Like when I helped with your college textbooks? Or when I covered Dad's business startup costs? Or Mom's medical bills? Or the countless other times I've stepped in while you've been living it up in New York?" The room went silent, my parents exchanging alarmed glances. Connor's expression hardened. "What's your point?" he asked defensively. "My point is that I know there's no foundation problem," I said, looking directly at my father. "Just like I know this isn't about the house at all. It's about Connor's gambling debts." My mother's gasp confirmed what I already knew. My father's face flushed dark red. "I don't know what you're talking about," he began, but I cut him off. "I heard you," I said simply. 3 weeks ago, when I came for dinner, I was upstairs and heard your conversation in the bedroom about Connor's investment mistake and how you'd get me to pay for it by pretending it was for house repairs." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's hand went to her throat in a gesture of distress that once would have instantly triggered my protective instincts. Now I recognized it as part of her emotional manipulation toolkit. "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation?" my father finally said, his voice rising with manufactured outrage, attempting to shift blame. "I was walking to find you before dinner," I corrected. "The door was open. I heard everything, including how I'm a sucker who never says no to family." Connor recovered first, his banker's training and damage control kicking in. "You misunderstood what you heard. We were discussing a completely different situation." "Really?" I challenged. "So you're not in financial trouble? There's no $230,000 you need to come up with quickly?" His silence was answer enough. "Mario, sweetie," my mother tried, tears welling in her eyes. "We were just trying to find solutions to a difficult situation. Connor made a mistake, and we were upset. We didn't mean those things the way they sounded." "You meant exactly what you said," I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. "You were planning to lie to me to get me to bail Connor out. Again. Just like you've been doing for years." "That's not fair," my father protested. "We've always been there for you too." "How?" I asked simply. "Name one time when I was struggling, and you provided significant support, financial or otherwise." The uncomfortable silence stretched as they searched for examples that didn't exist. "Look," Connor finally said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he used when explaining financial concepts to those he considered less sophisticated. "You don't have the expenses I have. My position requires certain appearances, networking, client entertainment. The Manhattan cost of living is completely different from Seattle. And that justifies lying to me? Using me?" "No one was using you," my mother insisted, tears now flowing freely. "We're family. We support each other." "The support only seems to flow in one direction," I observed. "And I've recently learned that Connor's investment mistake was actually gambling, high-stakes tables at the resort casino." "Is that true, Connor?" His expression confirmed it before he could formulate a denial. My father looked genuinely surprised, suggesting that Connor had misled our parents about the nature of his financial troubles as well. "You have a gambling problem," I said to Connor, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. "And instead of getting you help, Mom and Dad were going to cover it up and make me pay for it." "We were trying to protect the family," my father said defensively. "Connor made a mistake, but his career could be damaged if this got out. We were trying to handle it privately. At my expense," I pointed out, "without my knowledge or consent." "You've always handled the family problems," my mother said, as if this explained everything. "It's what you do. It's who you are." Her words crystallized everything that had gone wrong in our family dynamic. I had been assigned a role and expected to fulfill it regardless of the personal cost. "Not anymore," I said, standing up from the table. "I'm not your personal bank. I'm not responsible for fixing Connor's self-created problems. I'm your son, not your safety net." "You're just going to abandon your family when we need you?" my father demanded, his voice rising. "After everything we've done for you?" "I'm setting boundaries," I corrected, something I should have done years ago. "If Connor needs help with gambling addiction, I'll help find resources. If you need actual repairs on the house, I'll recommend contractors. But I won't be manipulated or lied to anymore, and I won't keep enabling destructive behavior by throwing money at problems." I walked toward the door, my heart pounding but my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. My mother followed, catching my arm with surprising strength. "Mario, please," she begged. "We're your parents. You can't just walk away." "I'm not walking away from you," I said gently, disengaging her hand. "I'm walking away from the unhealthy dynamics we've created together. When you're ready to have an honest relationship with me, not based on what I can provide but who I am, I'll be there." As I walked to my car, ignoring the escalating calls from my father and the theatrical sobs from my mother, I felt a complex mix of grief and liberation. The family I had thought I had didn't exist, and that knowledge was devastating. But in its place was the possibility of either rebuilding something healthier or finding the strength to create my own definition of family with people who valued me for myself. The first 72 hours after the confrontation were a barrage of communication attempts from my family. My phone lit up with calls and messages that cycled through various manipulation tactics with predictable precision. First came anger and accusations from my father. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By abandoning your family when we need you?" These messages were designed to trigger guilt and obligation, familiar buttons that had always worked before. When these went unanswered, my mother deployed emotional manipulation. "I couldn't sleep all night worrying about you. Please just call to let me know you're okay. My heart can't take this stress." These appeals to my protective instincts had traditionally been effective in bringing me back into line. Connor's approach was more direct. "You're overreacting to a conversation you weren't even supposed to hear. Man up and let's talk this out." His dismissive tone only reinforced my conviction that he didn't view me as an equal deserving of respect. By the fourth day, they had enlisted extended family. My aunt called, concerned about my sudden withdrawal from the family, clearly having received a carefully edited version of events. My cousin sent a text suggesting I was being selfish and hurting my parents unnecessarily. Even my elderly grandmother left a wavering voicemail, asking why I wasn't answering my mother's calls. Through it all, I maintained minimal contact, responding only with brief messages confirming my physical well-being, while declining invitations to talk things out in person. Doctor, Winters had warned me that family confrontations often lead to increased manipulation attempts before any real change occurs. They're trying to restore the status quo because it worked for them, she explained during our session that week. Your parents and brother benefited from the previous arrangement. They'll resist change using whatever tools have been effective in the past. At work, I struggled to maintain focus. The emotional turmoil affected my sleep, leaving me exhausted during important meetings. One afternoon, my project supervisor pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay after I had uncharacteristically snapped at a subcontractor. Family issues, I admitted vaguely. I'm working through it. Take the time you need, he advised, his expression sympathetic. Family stuff can be harder than any construction problem. Rachel was my rock throughout this period. She had always had a more reserved view of my family than I had allowed myself, noticing patterns I had been too close to see. I'm proud of you, she told me one evening, as we sat on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights come alive against the darkening sky. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's healthy. You deserve relationships that build you up, not drain you dry. Her support helped counterbalance the guilt that still occasionally surfaced, especially after particularly emotional messages from my mother. 32 years of conditioning couldn't be overcome in a few weeks, no matter how clear the betrayal had been. Through mutual friends, I learned that Connor had returned to New York without resolving his financial situation. My parents were telling people I was going through something and asking for prayers and support during this difficult time, as if my boundary setting was a temporary breakdown rather than a deliberate choice. The first major test came during Thanksgiving. I had always spent the holiday at my parents' house, where the entire extended family gathered for my mother's traditional feast. This year, Rachel and I accepted an invitation from her brother instead, spending the day in Tacoma with her family. Though I had informed my parents of my plans weeks in advance, they appeared unannounced at my apartment the morning of Thanksgiving, clearly expecting to find me alone and vulnerable to persuasion. We couldn't bear the thought of you spending the holiday by yourself, my mother explained, clutching a pumpkin pie as my father stood awkwardly behind her in the hallway. I'm not alone, I replied, keeping the door partially closed. I told you I'm spending the day with Rachel's family. But we're your real family, my mother insisted, hurt and bewilderment in her expression. You belong with us, especially on holidays. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Standing in my doorway, I explained as calmly as possible that I wasn't cutting them out of my life but was establishing healthier patterns of interaction. I outlined what I needed from them: honesty, respect for my boundaries, recognition of me as an individual rather than a role, and acknowledgement of the manipulation that had occurred. My father remained largely silent, his jaw set in the stubborn expression I recognized from childhood disagreements. My mother alternated between tears and health concerns, mentioning elevated blood pressure and anxiety that she attributed directly to my abandonment. I'm sorry you're struggling, I told her sincerely, but using your health as leverage to make me comply with your wishes isn't going to work anymore. I can help you find a good therapist if you'd like. They left eventually, the pie still in my mother's hands, their expressions a mix of confusion and indignation. They hadn't gotten what they came for, and the reality that their usual tactics wouldn't work was beginning to sink in. The Christmas season brought renewed pressure. Connor called to inform me that our mother was devastated by my continued distance and that her doctor had expressed concern about her mental state. Whatever issues you have with me, don't punish Mom and Dad, he argued. They were just trying to help me out of a tough spot. By lying to me and planning to take my money without my knowledge, I pointed out. That's not help, it's exploitation. It's family, he countered, as if the word itself justified any behavior. My resolve was tested most severely when my father called one evening in early January, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Connor's in real trouble, he admitted. The gambling was worse than we thought. He owes money to people you don't want to owe money to. He could lose everything, maybe even be in physical danger. Please, Mario, just this once, for your brother's safety. For a brief, wavering moment, I considered giving in. The fear in my father's voice triggered deep protective instincts that had been part of my identity for so long. Doctor, Winter's voice echoed in my mind. Remember that emergencies are often used to override boundaries. Ask yourself if this is truly an emergency requiring your intervention, or if there are other resources available. Dad, I said carefully, if Connor is in danger, he needs professional help, not money that enables his addiction. I can help research gambling addiction programs, even help cover the cost of treatment. But I won't pay off his debts just to have him accumulate more. My father's disappointment was palpable even through the phone. I didn't raise you to turn your back on family, he said before hanging up. The accusation stung, but I recognized it as another attempt to enforce the old patterns. I spent that evening researching gambling addiction resources and sent the information to both Connor and my parents, making clear my willingness to support recovery rather than enabling. Through this difficult period, my work became a sanctuary. I threw myself into a challenging new project, finding satisfaction in tangible progress and problems with clear solutions. My relationship with Rachel deepened as we discussed the future we wanted to build together, including what kind of family dynamics we hoped to create. The ultimate turning point came unexpectedly. A construction firm in Denver reached out through professional contacts, offering a position with greater responsibility and significantly better compensation than my current role. Under normal circumstances, I might have dismissed it immediately due to family obligations in Seattle. Now, I found myself seriously considering the opportunity. After several interviews and a visit to Denver, I accepted the position. When I told Rachel about my decision, she surprised me by suggesting she come with me. I can work remotely for the first few months, then look for something local, she said. I think a fresh start could be good for both of us. The decision felt like both an ending and a beginning. I was choosing my own path, prioritizing my future over the familiar patterns of the past. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When I informed my parents of my impending move, their reactions were predictably self-centered. My mother cried about me moving so far away and asked repeatedly who would help them with house maintenance. My father suggested I was running away from my responsibilities. Neither acknowledged the career advancement the move represented or expressed happiness for my opportunity. Their responses only confirmed I was making the right choice. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a major decision based solely on what was best for me and my future, not on how it would impact my role as the family fixer. It wasn't selfish, it was self-preservation. The drive to Denver with Rachel marked the beginning of a new chapter. We packed my Honda with essentials and made a road trip adventure of it, stopping at national parks and small towns along the way. With each mile that separated me from Seattle, I felt the weight of obligation lifting, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. Our arrival in Denver coincided with the beginning of spring, the city bursting with new growth that seemed to mirror my own internal transformation. We found an apartment in a vibrant neighborhood with mountain views that reminded me daily how far I had come, both literally and figuratively. The first months were a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Starting a new position brought challenges that consumed my professional energy, while establishing ourselves in a new city created social adjustments. Rachel and I explored Denver together on weekends, gradually building new routines and discovering favorite spots that became exclusively ours, untainted by family history or obligation. Contact with my family became increasingly limited and formal. I maintained brief, polite communication via text messages and occasional phone calls, but firmly redirected any conversations that ventured into manipulation or guilt territory. My parents seemed uncertain how to relate to me without the established dynamics of need and provision, leading to awkward surface-level exchanges. Connor's gambling issues eventually became impossible to hide professionally. He was placed on leave from his investment firm while seeking treatment, a development I learned about through a former colleague rather than family channels. When I called to express support for his recovery, our conversation was strained, but represented the first honest exchange we had shared in years. "I'm sorry," he said unexpectedly near the end of our call. "Not just for the gambling, but for, the way things happened. I didn't think about how it would affect you." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the deeper pattern, but it was a start. I accepted his apology while maintaining my boundaries, making clear that rebuilding trust would require time and consistent change. As the months passed, I discovered aspects of myself that had been submerged beneath my caretaker role. I joined a local hiking group, reconnecting with a love of outdoor adventure that had been neglected during years of weekend family obligations. I took a woodworking class, finding satisfaction in creating tangible objects with my hands, a different kind of building than my professional work. Rachel thrived in Denver, eventually finding a position with a local marketing firm that recognized her talents more fully than her previous employer. Our relationship deepened as we built our life together, free from the constant interference of family drama. On our 1-year anniversary of moving to Denver, I proposed officially, using the ring I had purchased back in Seattle but now with a stronger foundation for our future together. Our engagement announcement received tepid congratulations from my family, with my mother immediately focusing on wedding logistics and suggesting Seattle as the obvious location. When we politely informed her we were planning a small ceremony in Denver, her disappointment was evident, but no longer held the power to change my decisions. The most significant shift in my professional life came unexpectedly. My new employers recognized capabilities in me that had gone underutilized in my previous position. I was given the opportunity to lead a team developing innovative construction methods for environmentally sustainable buildings, a challenge that engaged both my technical skills and my emerging leadership abilities. "You have good instincts for balancing project needs with team welfare," my supervisor noted during a review. "People trust you because you're genuine, not because you're trying to please everyone." His observation highlighted another area of growth. Without the constant pressure to be the reliable fixer for my family, I found healthier ways to connect with colleagues. I could support others without sacrificing myself, maintain boundaries while still being dependable, and recognize when helping actually helped and when it merely enabled dysfunction. 6 months before our wedding, my parents suggested visiting Denver to see where you live now. I agreed with clear parameters around the visit duration and expectations. Rachel and I prepared carefully, discussing potential scenarios and establishing our united approach to any manipulation attempts. Their arrival brought the expected awkwardness. My mother commented repeatedly on how far away Denver was, while my father assessed our apartment with the eye of someone looking for flaws to fix. Their discomfort in the environment I had created independently of them was apparent in every interaction. The visit reached a turning point during dinner at a local restaurant we had chosen to showcase our new city. My mother raised the subject of financial support for the wedding, presenting it as a generous offer rather than the control mechanism I recognized it to be. "We want to contribute," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in her familiar way. "That's what parents do for their children's weddings." "Thank you," I replied calmly, "but Rachel and I have budgeted for the wedding we want. We appreciate the offer, but we're comfortable with our plans." My father looked genuinely confused. "You're turning down financial help? That's not like you, Mario." "I've changed," I said simply. "I've learned that money in our family often comes with unspoken expectations. I'd rather maintain our current relationship dynamics, which have been healthier for everyone." The uncomfortable silence that followed revealed how accurately I had identified their motivation. The visit concluded without major conflict, but with a clear understanding that our relationship had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the son who could be manipulated through obligation and guilt. I was an adult who chose the nature of his family connections. Through mutual friends in Seattle, I occasionally heard updates about my parents and Connor. My parents had delayed their retirement plans, likely due to financial constraints they had expected me to alleviate. Connor had completed a treatment program and was slowly rebuilding his career at a smaller firm, living more modestly than before. These changes, while challenging for them, represented necessary adaptations to reality rather than the continued fantasy that I would solve all problems. As our wedding approached, Rachel and I created detailed plans for our future, including financial goals, career aspirations, and eventually starting a family of our own. These conversations inevitably led to reflections on the kind of parents we hoped to be and the family culture we wanted to create. "I want our children to be supported in becoming themselves, not in fulfilling roles we assign them," I told Rachel during one such discussion. "I want them to know their value isn't tied to what they provide, but who they are." These realizations, painful as the journey to them had been, represented the unexpected gift that had emerged from the betrayal I had overheard that October evening. By breaking free from destructive patterns, I had gained not just financial independence but the freedom to define myself and my relationships on healthier terms. 2 years after moving to Denver, Rachel and I had settled into a rhythm of life that would have been unimaginable during my Seattle days. Our wedding had been exactly what we wanted, a joyful celebration with friends who had become our chosen family, a handful of relatives who respected our boundaries, and a notable absence of drama or manipulation. We had purchased our first home together, a craftsman bungalow in a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and mountain views. Rachel was 4 months pregnant with our first child, a development that had brought both joy and renewed reflection on family legacies. My relationship with my parents and Connor had evolved into something I could never have predicted. After months of minimal contact following their visit to Denver, my mother had reached out with an email that showed the first genuine self-reflection I had ever witnessed from her. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship," she wrote. "A friend recommended a book about family dynamics, and it's made me question some patterns I never noticed before. I don't expect this to fix everything, but I wondered if you might be willing to talk sometime." That conversation had led to others, each one a careful step toward a more authentic connection. My parents had begun to see me as an individual with my own life and choices rather than an extension of themselves or a resource to be tapped. The change wasn't complete or consistent, but it represented progress I had once thought impossible. We arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a restaurant halfway between Seattle and Denver, during a business trip that brought me within reasonable distance. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to genuine conversation, with my parents asking questions about my life and actually listening to the answers rather than waiting for opportunities to steer the discussion toward their needs. My father, traditionally more stoic and less emotionally expressive, surprised me by acknowledging the family patterns more directly than my mother had been able to. "I didn't realize how much we depended on you," he admitted. "It wasn't fair, but it was comfortable. When you stopped playing along, it forced changes none of us were ready for." "Has it been difficult?" I asked, genuinely curious about their experience of the past 2 years. "We had to postpone retirement," he confirmed, "and downsize some plans. But maybe that's how it should have been all along. We're responsible for our choices, not you." My relationship with Connor had undergone its own transformation. His gambling addiction recovery had required honest self-assessment that extended beyond his financial choices to his overall patterns of behavior, including his treatment of me. During a video call that had initially felt like an obligation, he had offered an apology that felt surprisingly genuine. "I took advantage of you because it was easy," he acknowledged. "You were always the responsible one, and I got to be the golden child without any of the actual responsibility. I'm sorry for how I treated you, and for taking your support for granted." While I didn't immediately trust this new version of my brother, I appreciated the effort toward honesty. Over time, our conversations became more authentic, focusing on our current lives rather than past grievances or expectations. I discovered that beneath the entitled behavior I had resented for so long, there were aspects of Connor I actually liked and could connect with as equals. The most profound changes, however, had occurred within me. Through continued therapy and the experience of building a life based on choice rather than obligation, I had developed a clear understanding of healthy boundaries and genuine generosity. I could now distinguish between giving that came from love and giving that came from fear or manipulation. This wisdom extended to all my relationships, both personal and professional. I became known at work for my mentorship of younger team members, offering guidance and support without creating dependency. I developed friendships based on mutual respect rather than what I could provide. Most importantly, Rachel and I built a partnership where needs were expressed openly and support flowed in both directions. As we prepared for parenthood, we discussed frequently how to break the cycle of unhealthy family dynamics. "I worry sometimes," I admitted to Rachel one evening as we worked on the nursery. "What if these patterns are so deeply ingrained that I repeat them without realizing?" "The fact that you're asking that question is exactly why you won't," she assured me. "You're conscious of it now. We'll build different patterns together." When my parents asked if they could visit after the baby's birth, I found myself able to consider the request without the automatic anxiety such interactions had once triggered. We established clear parameters, including visit duration and expectations about respecting our parenting choices. The fact that they accepted these boundaries without protest demonstrated how far we had all come. The pregnancy also opened unexpected doors for healing with my mother. During a phone call primarily focused on birth plans, she shared reflections on her own experience as a new parent. "I was so afraid of doing it wrong," she admitted. "My mother was critical of everything, and I swore I'd be different. I think sometimes that fear made me hold too tightly to what I thought family should look like." These glimpses of vulnerability from the woman who had always presented a facade of certainty helped me understand the intergenerational nature of our family patterns. My parents hadn't set out to create a dynamic where one child was expected to sacrifice for the others. They had been working from their own flawed templates, just as I had. This understanding didn't excuse the manipulation or betrayal I had experienced, but it placed it in a context that allowed for the possibility of forgiveness without forgetting. I could acknowledge the harm while recognizing the humanity of those who had caused it. One of the most remarkable transformations was my relationship with money and generosity. The same resources that had once been drained through exploitation now funded choices that brought genuine joy and purpose. Rachel and I established a charitable giving plan that supported causes we believed in. We offered help to friends in temporary difficulties without creating dependency. We invested in our community through volunteer work and local initiatives. "You're still one of the most generous people I know," Rachel observed. "The difference is that now it comes from choice and joy rather than obligation and guilt." As I stood in the completed nursery, running my hand over the crib I had built myself during those woodworking classes, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal I had overheard that October evening had initially seemed like the end of everything I thought I knew about family and love. Instead, it had become the catalyst for building something far more authentic and valuable. The lessons had been painful but essential. True family supports growth rather than exploitation. Genuine love empowers rather than controls. Healthy boundaries protect relationships rather than damage them. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in destructive patterns. I wondered sometimes what would have happened if I had never overheard that conversation. Would I have continued indefinitely as the family financial safety net, draining my resources and opportunities to maintain an illusion of family harmony? Would I have eventually discovered the truth through some other means? Or would I have remained blind to the dynamics that had shaped so much of my life? Whatever might have been, I was grateful for the clarity that moment had provided, painful as it was. It had set me on a path toward authenticity and self-respect that had ultimately benefited everyone involved, even those who had initially resisted the change most strongly. As I think back on this journey, I wonder how many of you have experienced similar family dynamics, or had moments where you discovered people weren't who you thought they were. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between maintaining peace and standing up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family, boundaries, and personal growth. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most important transformations.